Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum friends. Today we are going to discuss about UML deployment diagram. UML deployment diagram is one of the type of UML diagram which is used to define the hardware requirements for a particular product to execute the software. Basically, it maps the software design requirement to the physical system which executes the software design and we visualize how software interacts with hardware to complete the test execution. To design the deployment diagram node, component, artifact, and interface notations are used. Purpose of deployment diagrams. Now let us discuss the purpose of deployment diagrams. The term deployment in the deployment diagram itself specifies the role of this diagram. It is used for describing hardware components where the software components are actually deployed. UML is generally used to describe software artifacts of a system. However, UML deployment diagrams are a special case of UML diagram where the main emphasis is on the hardware topology. Here, topology means layout of the system. The main purpose of the deployment diagram to represent the hardware topology of the system, to represent how different hardware components are interconnected and how these hardware components are used to deploy software components. Symbols and components. Let us first understand two basic terms which we'll be using frequently is symbols and components. First of all, symbols. UML deployment diagram symbols represent a node, object, node instance, component instance. Here, component instance means a replica or copy of component, interface, etc. These symbols help us to create an accurate diagram for documentation. A similar image which could be referred to components. Components represent different hardware nodes in which software resides. Note, it is symbols that connect different components and help us to make a good UML deployment diagram. How to draw a deployment diagram. This is one of the most important sections of this article as we are going to discuss how we can draw a deployment diagram. The most important component of a deployment diagram is nodes. Nodes are simply the physical hardware that is used to deploy the application. An efficient and good deployment diagram is very important as it covers the following important aspects. These important aspects are as follows: maintainability. The system design should be easily maintainable. Portability. The system should be designed in such a way that it is easy to implement new changes. Performance. The system should have high performance. Scalability. The system should be flexible enough so that it could be easily expanded. Before making a deployment diagram, two important artifacts must be identified and should be understood properly. And these two important artifacts are nodes and how these nodes are interconnected. Let us prepare a simple deployment diagram that consists of the following components: server, modem, router, user nodes like mobile, printer, etc. This example is assumed to be a web based simple application that is hosted in a clustered environment using participated servers. A user node like mobile will connect our application using internet through modem and routers. A simple deployment diagram considering all the above mentioned points for all this will be. Now we can assume that we can make a simple deployment diagram. Let's do a discussion on our next topic, which is where can we use deployment diagram. Where to use UML deployment diagrams. Deployment diagrams are mainly consumed by system engineers. These diagrams help us to describe the physical component like hardware involved, participants' nodes, their distribution, and how they are interconnected. Deployment diagrams could be assumed as the hardware component where the software components reside. Deployment diagrams can be used for the following cases: to visualize the hardware topology of the system, to represent the hardware details of the system, to represent the hardware details of a distributed application, and many more. Conclusion is USL deployment diagram is very important as it not only help us to visualize but also help us to understand better the whole program, whole system. A simple and efficient UML deployment diagram greatly help us to make a visual diagram of how these hardware components are interlinked. What is the relation between each hardware component? How the software resides in these hardware components? Also, there are other types of UML diagrams that are important to understand for the efficient making of the system. So, friends, this is it for now. Thank you for watching this lecture, and please also share the summary what you have learned from today's lecture in the comment box. Allah Hafiz.